Welcome, Gabriela. It's a pleasure to have you here visiting Lund. We had just this very exciting session in which we had natural scientists, social scientists, lawyers, people from very different countries as well. And we were very excited that you could present part of your research and we could engage in this dialogue and simulation. So in this context, what do you think when we're in the middle of socio-ecological conflicts? How can scientific evidence, considering both evidence from social science, natural sciences, can be presented to courts so they effectively inform judicial decision-making? We think and talk a lot about how science policy interface, and we do relatively less about how science is or can inform judicial decision-making. So can you share some of your experience in this field?
Thank you, Claudia, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and it was a very interesting session. So in my experience, which is related mostly with environmental conflicts in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, what has been useful is the work of scientists with indigenous communities or the plaintiffs who are going to court because of a lawsuit. So this work has been done together between lawyers, scientists, and the indigenous communities with some kind of problem. And which is very important is to make the following up of the environmental damage, which is tried to be shown to the judge. The case I exposed today was related to the massive death of bees related to the pesticide of fipronil. And what the bee team group made in relation with the beekeepers was to make a following up of all the beehives that were affected, establish a cartography of the beehives, and an analysis of the winds in order to establish what was the real causation of this massive death of bees. This study was made by a group of scientists, but obviously it was in relation with all the beekeepers that were affected, and a dossier was made and taken to the judge. And in this case, it was useful because the judge took it into account and made a ruling considering that it was a good proof. We had another experiences where the proof hasn't been taken into account. There are a lot of challenges, and those challenges mostly have to do with the custody, the change of custody of the proof. Sometimes the judges are asking for the authorities to give the real proof of the damage, of the environmental damage, without taking into account the arguments of the communities or the communities with the scientists and the lawyers. So that's a challenge, but in the case I exposed today, there was like a success in that sense.
Yeah, something that I found really interesting when you were making this presentation and where we were getting engaged in dialogue on this is how people were not only interested in getting economical compensation, but their claims went beyond that. So can you share something about how the beekeepers you were working with expressed, or what were the aims of actually getting the case to court and getting some remedies?
Yeah, well, so in this case, mostly when you have a massive mortality of bees, the focus has been on economic compensation to the beekeepers that lost the beehives. But in this case, in this work, the idea was to show that there is an ecological affectation, which is not only in terms of economic loss for the beekeepers, but is also related to the ecosystemic loss of pollination. So part of the proof that was presented to the judge was to, first of all, establish the relationship between beekeeping and Mayan communities, which has been practicing agriculture with beekeeping for a long time. That was a first issue. But second, that all these loss of honeybees only was the point of the iceberg of the loss of the whole pollinators that were in the area that was fumigated with this fipronil. So the loss is only seen in the surface, but like the research that was made was showing also that there was another kind of loss that we have to consider. And third of all, that these the pollinators that were lost are important not only because of the economic activity of beekeeping, but also because they are important for the whole system of agriculture, which in this case is indigenous traditional corn system production, and also to the other kind of fauna and vegetation that you can find in the region. So there is a linkage, and that change of view, I think, was one of the important contributions of this collaboration between scientists, lawyers, and beekeepers in this region.
That's really interesting, and that takes me also to ask you the question of the burden of proof in this context of trying to access environmental justice. In your experience, what has been the case? Who has the burden of proof? And what are the challenges and dilemmas that this presents?
So the conflicts, environmental conflicts in this region are new kind of conflicts because they are related to the expansion of a new kind of model of agriculture. So it's very difficult to establish who has the burden of proof, but mostly in this case has been the affected communities, the affected households. So usually the burden of proof is on communities, but the problem for them is that it's very difficult to establish a methodology to give the proof that is sufficient, that will be taken by the judges. So like in practical terms, the burden of proof is in communities, but this is a discussion that has been taken to the Supreme Court in Mexico to say who has the burden of proof, because for the communities it's very expensive or difficult to be showing, for instance, the pollution of water, or the loss or the causation of this loss of beehives in relation maybe to pesticides, or it can be another kind of issues, no? So it's not kind of obvious. You always have to have some kind of support, and this support should be obviously coming from the government.
Yeah, that's a really important issue that you highlight in terms of the inequalities that are in terms of not only economic resources, but also in terms of technical resources, and also this idea that we often have in law of this linear relationship between cause and effect. But as we know in sustainability science and in other areas that should be informing law, this is not a linear, but it's a multi-dimensional process that also needs to be taken into account. So it's really interesting also how you're collaborating with different natural science, social sciences, lawyers, traditional knowledge holders. And to conclude, when we're talking about this generation of knowledge in the context of judicial processes, what could you like to share for other academics that are participating in similar processes in Europe? What do you think are the potential lessons learned and exchange of ideas between Latin America and Europe in this context?
Well, so nowadays, like, we are always talking about the importance of interdisciplinary research, And in the case of environmental conflicts, I think is where you can see why it's so valuable to have the dialogue between anthropologists. For instance, myself, I am an anthropologist, or ecologist, or a chemist who can make the research on water pollution. And also in collaboration with the indigenous people or the people who are affected. So in that sense, I have the feeling that in the kind of knowledge that is generated in a judicialization process of an environmental conflict has this value of interdisciplinary and also very practical in terms of it's going to have an effect or a resolution in a ruling or a judicial decision. And also it implies also to have a viewpoint wider than what is discussed in national sphere. So, for instance, I think what has been discussed here in Europe, in the European Union, in relation, for instance, pesticides regulation in relation to pollinators, is useful also for the cases that are coming to Mexico and different national sphere. So, in that sense, you understand why the sharing of knowledge, not only from the point of view of interdisciplinary, but also in terms of transnational dialogue between academia is very important. So I think that there is where you can see it very clear.
Thank you. And we see that some of the challenges that come from the production of pesticides may be emerging in one region and then affecting others. So this idea that socio-ecological conflicts and the root causes of them, and therefore also the solutions, need to be integrated both in terms of different disciplines, but also different scales of law, of socio-ecological challenges, and make this match between socio-ecological processes and then the laws that we actually need for advancing these pathways for sustainability. So thank you so much, Gabriela, and we look forward to continue collaborating on these topics.
Right.